He was called to cleanse a chapel that no longer held God. The walls bled scripture no priest had ever read. In its mirror, he saw something that whispered his name, backwards. The next day, he spoke only in silence, and the chapel has remained locked. Ever since, the road is narrow here. Overgrown hedges swallow the edges. The pavement cracks like old bone on nights when the fog rolls low. There is a glow in the distance, a faint fractured light color shifting as if through glass, but no lanterns. Hang there, no windows should still be lit. The chapel of St. Mirabel has not opened its doors since 1964. For 60 years, it has stood at the edge of Old Kings Road. The last village nearby is 6 miles away. Most of the homes there are empty, and the people who remain know better than to take this road after sundown by day. The chapel seems harmless, a small stone structure, slate roof caved in, its bell tower choked with ivy. A rusted gate leans open, never locked, though no one crosses it willingly. The graveyard behind it is a field of tilted stones, their names, carved so shallow the rain has erased them. Wind moves through the trees like a sigh, even in summer. The air feels cold here, but it is the windows that hold their gaze. 4 stained glass panels, depicting the apostles, their faces pale and unmarked by time. The panes should have shattered long ago. Storms have come, vandals too, but the glass does not crack at night. Travelers say it glows dim at first, then pulsing, as if there are candles lit inside. There are no candles. The interior has been empty for decades. No oil, no lamps. Only a broken altar and pews covered in a fine layer of gray dust. No one can explain the light. Some say it's the moon, though the glow comes even on nights without one. Others claim it's phosphor in the paint, though the windows were made in the 1700s. Long before such methods were used, few have entered to find out. Those who did never stayed long. The last recorded visit was in 1983, when 2 parish volunteers attempted to catalog the ruins. They reported no light inside, but both refused to return. One, a man named Ellis, told his wife he heard something while measuring the nave, a sound he couldn't place, a sound he didn't want to describe. The locals whisper about the place quietly. No one dares to repeat the older stories about why the church was shuttered. In the first place, about the congregation that vanished one autumn morning in 1964, leaving hymnals scattered across the pews. No bodies were ever found. The diocese closed the property without explanation. Official records say it was structural instability, but the building still stands, almost untouched, while sturdier churches have long since rotted away. There is a weight to the chapel, even from the road. Visitors describe a pressure in their ears, like being underwater. Birds do not perch on its roof, grass does not grow at its threshold, and no one remembers hearing the bell toll since the day it closed. One man, a lorry driver, claims he once passed by at dusk. He saw the light flicker in the windows, shapes moving behind it. He slowed, thinking perhaps vandals had broken in, but as he rolled down his window, he heard something sound like breathing slow, rhythmic, not his own, not from the trees or the wind, coming from the chapel itself. He didn't stop. He didn't look closer. He never drove that road again. And yet, for reasons no one can name, the chapel remains. No developers have touched the land. No demolition crews have been contracted. Even the county avoids filing new surveys of the site. It is as if the chapel of St. Mirabel is not entirely there, but cannot be entirely gone, and still, on certain nights, the windows glow red, blue, green, and gold. The light shifts softly, almost like the slow beating of a heart. Tonight is one of those nights, and someone is walking toward it. The car stopped just beyond the leaning gate. Its engine ticked in the stillness, metal cooling against the damp evening air. Beyond the windshield, the chapel loomed, a dark shape cut from stone and shadow. Its broken roof, a jagged outline against the pale sky. Father Brenner sat behind the wheel for nearly 10 minutes before opening his door. He was 71. His hands trembled when he held them out in the cold. Years of service had not made him a stranger to places like this. but something about St. Mirabel made his chest feel tight. 4 priests had already turned down the assignment, one after seeing the windows glow from the roadside, another after reading the last parish records, which spoke only of silence and empty pews. The diocese had called Brenner not because he was the most willing, but because he was the last one who would still answer. He stepped out slowly. Gravel cracked beneath his shoes. The air smelled faintly of ash. Though there were no fires, no chimneys, nothing to burn, the chapel's doors hung crooked, swollen by years of rain. The bell tower, choked in ivy, leaned slightly to one side, as if straining away from the rest of the building. Brenner did not go in. Not yet. He circled the grounds first, pausing at the graveyard, where rows of stone markers tilted like loose teeth. The earth felt soft here, too soft for winter. Each step sank slightly, as if something beneath the soil shifted when he passed in. His notebook, he later wrote, "No birds, no wind, no insects. The place feels vacant, but not empty." He stood at the threshold, staring into the dark interior light from the evening sky, filtered through the stained glass windows, scattering red and gold patches across the floorboards. The nave was silent, too silent, and that's when he heard a single footstep above him, sharp, slow, deliberate, as if someone had shifted their weight on an old beam. The roof was gone. The rafters had collapsed years ago, leaving only open sky above. There was nothing for anyone to walk on, nothing but air. He froze, waited, listened. Another step, softer this time, closer to where he stood. Then a long drawn-out creak, as though wood strained under weight that could not be there. His hand moved instinctively to the rosary at his belt, but he did not call out. He did not speak a word. Instead, he stepped back from the doorway, retreating to the safety of the gravel path. His notes would later say only, "Sound consistent with footsteps, origin unknown. Recommend caution before entry." That night, Brenner stayed in the rectory of a neighboring parish. He barely slept each time he closed his eyes. He saw the fractured roof, the open void above the chapel, and heard again that measured tread, moving, deliberate, circling, waiting. When asked why he didn't go inside that first day, he simply said, "It didn't want me to." The following morning, he would return, but he would not return alone, because by then, the footsteps had followed him. The chapel was darker inside than it had looked from the road, even with the windows unbroken. The glass swallowed more light than it let through. The colors that spilled across the warped floorboards felt muted, heavy, as though the glow came from beneath the wood, not the sky outside. Father Brenner stepped carefully down the center aisle. His breath rose in faint clouds. Though the air outside had not been cold, every footfall stirred dust that hung like pale smoke before settling again. He found a bench near the altar and lowered himself slowly, his knees stiff from the long drive. From here, the chapel felt smaller, as though the walls leaned in just slightly, closing the space by degrees. The silence was deep, not just an absence of sound, but the sort of stillness that makes the air feel thick in the lungs. He lit a single candle on the bench beside him. The flame didn't flicker. It burned straight and steady, as if the air itself refused to move. He began to write in his notebook observations, measurements, an outline for the prayers he would begin at midnight. His handwriting was slower now, more deliberate than it had been years ago. Each letter carried the weight of someone forcing themselves to remain calm, but something wasn't right. He paused, pen held above the page. At first, he thought it was the wind, some subtle draft passing through cracks in the rotted ceiling, but there was no wind. The candle stayed still, and the sound did not shift like a breeze. It was a voice, low, distant, layered, as though several throats spoke in unison from far away. It came from beneath the floor. Brenner froze, head tilted toward the boards at his feet. The sound was faint, almost indistinct, but there was a rhythm to it. Not words at first, just a cadence. A rise and fall like a breath turned into music. Then, slowly, syllables began to form Latin. He thought, or something like it. The words carried the shape of the Mass, the old songs he had learned as a boy, but they were Wrong certain vowels dragged too long. Phrases looped back on themselves, repeating half a line before breaking into another, as though the prayer had been folded and stitched into something new. And that's when he heard it, one voice, distinct. From the rest, closer, a whisper that seemed to slide between the others, rising just enough for him to catch fragments, not full sentences, not any word he could recognize, only sounds, wet and deliberate, as if someone were shaping syllables from the back of their throat. He set the notebook down and stood, every joint in his body stiff, with a tension he couldn't name. The boards beneath his boots felt solid, cold, though the sound continued from somewhere below. There was no basement in the chapel. He had reviewed the original plans. Nothing existed. Under the nave but earth and stone. The chanting grew louder, still distant, but layered, multiplying until it seemed to seep from every crack in the floor. It did not rise or fall like normal voices. It circled, repeating itself in broken intervals, as though the sound had no beginning and no end. Brenner moved toward the altar. Each step brought a shift in the voices, softer to the left, louder to the right, as though they adjusted to follow his movements. When he reached the altar rail, the whispering stopped, not faded. Stopped. The silence pressed in, heavier than before. He could hear the blood moving in his ears. The candle behind him made a faint crackle as wax dripped to the bench. Then, from directly beneath his feet, a single word rose. Not Latin, not anything he could translate, just a sound, long and drawn out, shaped by a voice too close to be imagined. It was repeated 3 times, each repetition louder, though the tone never changed, flat, hollow, as if the speaker had no breath to waste on emphasis. Brenner stepped back toward the bench, his rosary slipping from his hand. The chain struck the wood and made the faintest metallic rattle. The voices below answered with a single, rising note, something between a hum and a growl, a sound that vibrated in his chest like a distant drum. Then, without warning, everything stopped. The candle went out, not with a gust, not with any movement of air. It was simply gone, leaving the nave in a depth of dark that felt almost physical. Brenner didn't speak, didn't move. He waited in the dark, his ears straining for any sound, any shift of weight on the floor. Nothing came, only his own breath, shallow and uneven, filling the silence. He stayed like that until dawn, when the first pale light touched the windows. The voices did not return, but the boards beneath his feet felt warm, as though something had moved through them during the night. When he opened his notebook to write, his last line from the evening before was gone, erased cleanly, as if the page had never been touched. Only a single word remained, written in a hand that wasn't his. It was not in any language he knew, but when he looked at it, his lips moved on their own. He heard himself whisper it aloud. The crate arrived just after dusk, a weathered wooden box, marked with seals from the Vatican archives. Its corners were worn smooth, as if carried by many hands over many years too. Men brought it to the chapel's threshold. They would not cross inside. They left it there, on the cold stones, and drove away without a word. Father Brenner stood over it for a long time before prying it open. Inside, wrapped in faded linen, lay the mirror, an oval frame of blackened brass, etched with patterns too faint to make out. The glass itself was unmarked, polished to a depth that seemed almost too clear, as if it reflected not just light, but something else. It was said to be a relic, a tool once used by the church to reveal what could not be seen by the human eye. Not a weapon, not a charm, only a window. Brenner carried it inside, setting it on the altar where the candle had been. The night before, the air was still. The nave smelled of old wood and damp stone. No wind passed through the broken roof above, but the glass began to fog at first. He thought it was his breath. He held it back, watching the surface. The haze continued to spread, pale and uneven, curling like smoke trapped beneath the surface. The temperature in the room did not change. The candle beside it stayed steady, but the mirror clouded, as though something on the other side exhaled. Brenner leaned closer. His own reflection appeared faintly, distorted by the mist. The outlines of his face wavered, Bending as though the glass itself shifted, he whispered a prayer under his breath. The kind he had said countless times before, simple and steady, and that's when he heard a voice, not his own, not from behind him. From inside the reflection, the sound was soft, a rhythm of syllables he could not place. The words carried the cadence of scripture, but not the structure. They rolled in fragments, as though half of each phrase was missing, stitched together with sounds that did not belong to any language. He knew, yet they felt familiar. Something in his chest responded to them, as if some deep memory stirred at the sound. The fog thinned for a moment, and his reflection grew clear, but it was not still. His mouth moved. Though he was silent, the mirrored version of himself spoke in time with the whispers, each phrase timed perfectly. Lips forming words his own tongue refused to shape. Brenner stumbled back, knocking into the altar rail. The mirror did not fall. Fog did not lift. The reflection turned its head slightly, watching him without moving its eyes. He closed his own, whispering another prayer, this one louder, steadier when he opened them. The whispers had stopped. His reflection was once again his own, but something wasn't right. The glass no longer showed the chapel behind him. The windows, the walls, all of it was gone. The surface reflected only him, and a black expanse where the world should be. It was as if he stood alone in some endless void, his figure suspended in nothing. Then the whispering returned, not words now, just a sound, low and pulsing, like a hum buried beneath the surface of the glass. The fog swirled again, thickening, curling around his mirrored form, until only his eyes remained visible in the reflection. They did not blink, they did not move when he did. He shut the mirror away that night, covering it with the same linen it had arrived in. But as he turned to leave the chapel, the sound followed him, not aloud, inside a rhythm, faint but insistent, repeating itself in the back of his mind like a psalm he could not forget. No matter how hard he tried, when he reached the rectory, he wrote a single line in his notes before setting them aside. The mirror does not reflect, it remembers. He underlined the words once, then again his hand did not stop shaking until dawn. Night was colder than the last. A thin frost clung to the grass outside, glowing faintly in the moonlight. Inside the chapel, the air felt still, thick, as if the walls themselves held their breath. Father Brenner moved with care. Each step across the warped floor released a faint creak, the wood settling like bones in an old grave. He had returned for one reason, to face the mirror again. It sat on the altar, covered in the linen it had arrived in. The fabric looked damp now. Though the air was dry, he reached for it, hesitated, then pulled it free. The glass was clear, perfectly polished. His reflection appeared at once, pale in the dim light, his hands still trembling at his sides. The nave behind him was empty, its windows dark, but something wasn't right. The reflection didn't follow his movements. He tilted his head slightly. The man in the mirror did not move. It stood perfectly still, eyes fixed forward, chest unmoving. Then, as Brenner stared, the figure began to fade, not quickly, not like smoke, piece by piece. Its outline dissolved, until only the chapel remained in the glass, but not as it truly was. The pews were full. Dozens of figures sat in silence, lined in neat rows that stretched farther back than the chapel could hold. Their shapes were human, but incomplete, bodies without faces, outlines without detail. Each one sat perfectly upright, their heads turned toward the altar. Brenner's breath caught in his throat. He turned his head, looking behind him at the real pews. They were empty, silent, covered in dust, but in the glass. The congregation remained. He leaned closer. The mirror's surface seemed deeper than it should, as if the space inside stretched far beyond the frame. The figures were not entirely still. Their shoulders rose and fell in unison, slow, rhythmic, the sound of air pulling in and out from lungs that did not exist. And that's when he heard a word, soft, drawn out, carried on that collective breath. Stay. It came as an exhale, a single sound shared by all of them, whispered without mouths, without voices. The candle beside the altar flickered for the first time, its flame stretching sideways, Though there was no draft, Brenner stepped back. His heels struck the edge of a loose board. The sound echoed too loudly. As if the room had grown larger in an instant, the figures in the mirror turned not their heads, not their bodies, only their attention, though faceless. Though blank, Brenner felt each gaze fix on him with a weight that pressed through his ribs, tightening his chest. The word came again, this time louder, sharper, the sound cutting through the air in a single unified breath. Stay. The mirror fogged around the edges. The figures remained clear, even as the glass blurred. The fog pulsed with their breathing, expanding and contracting in time. With that hollow exhalation, Brenner reached for the linen, his hands shaking, fingers fumbling with the fabric, but his own reflection had not returned, only the faceless congregation, now leaning forward in unison, their featureless heads tilting toward him. The third breath came. Deeper this time, it carried the word differently. Not a whisper now, a demand. Stay. The sound reverberated through the nave, though no echo should have carried. The windows shuddered faintly in their frames, glass rattling as if struck by distant thunder. Then silence. The fog cleared all at once. The figures were gone. The pews were empty again. And at last, Brenner's reflection returned, pale, eyes wide, mouth slightly open, but the reflection moved a moment later than he did half a second off, delayed, as if watching him from somewhere else entirely. His breath came uneven, his fingers gripped the altar until the wood creaked beneath his nails. And in that stillness, with the room quiet once more, he realized the echo of that single word had not left his ears. It hadn't been a sound carried through the air. It had settled deeper, lodged behind his thoughts, repeating itself with every beat of his heart stay. It didn't fade when he left the chapel. It didn't stop when he returned to the rectory. It was still there as he lay awake, staring at the ceiling, his pulse keeping time with that single whispered command. In by morning, Brenner could no longer tell if it was the mirror or his own voice repeating it. The first light of morning stretched across Old King's Road. The hedges along the roadside stood still, heavy with dew, and the mist had not yet lifted from the fields. The chapel's outline was faint against the gray horizon, its roof a dark, broken crown against the sky. The caretaker, Thomas Lay, made his rounds at dawn as he had every day that week. He kept his distance from the chapel doors, preferring to wait until Brenner emerged before stepping closer. The priest had insisted on staying overnight again, despite Thomas's warnings, despite what they had both heard in the nights before. The sun was only a pale line when the scream came. It was not a long scream. It did not rise and fall with panic or fear. It was sharp, sudden, a single note torn from the throat of someone who had been silent too long. And then, nothing. Thomas froze where he stood. The birds in the hedges went quiet. The morning seemed to hold itself still, but something wasn't right. The scream hadn't carried the way it should have. It was loud, but it didn't echo. Not off the chapel walls, not across the empty fields. It felt as if the sound had been swallowed before it could leave the air. Thomas moved toward the door. The wood was warped, swollen from rain, its iron hinges streaked with rust. When he tried the handle, it didn't budge, locked from inside. Though Brenner had no key to secure it that way, he pounded on the panels, calling the priest's name. No answer, not a sound. And that's when he heard a faint crack, like glass under strain. Not breaking, not shattering, just the sound of something old, something fragile, shifting against pressure. He shoved his shoulder against the door. Once, twice, the wood groaned, then split at the frame, swinging inward with a sharp, splintered protest. The air inside was cold, colder than it should have been for morning. His breath rose in pale clouds as he stepped into the nave. Father Brenner was there, kneeling in the center aisle. His body was still. His hands rested neatly on his thighs, palms down. His eyes were open, unblinking, fixed on something beyond the broken altar. His lips were closed, but they looked strained, drawn too tightly, as though held shut by more than his own will. No sound came from him, not even his breath. Thomas approached slowly, each footfall echoing in the vast quiet. There was no sign of a struggle, no overturned pews, No marks on the floor, only Brenner, motionless, his face pale in the thin light filtering through the windows, and at the altar. The mirror had sat where Brenner had left it, but the glass was no longer whole. A single crack split the surface from edge to edge, not shattered, just broken enough to divide the reflection in two. The line curved slightly, like a vein beneath the skin, and from certain angles, it seemed to pulse faintly with the flicker of the candle beside it. The linen that had once covered it lay on the floor. It was damp, though the stone beneath was dry. No source for the moisture could be found. Thomas crouched beside the priest, reaching for his shoulder. Brenner did not move. His body was warm, his pulse steady, but his eyes did not shift to meet the caretaker's. It was as if his gaze was fixed on something that was no longer there. The chapel was silent, too silent, not just the absence of sound, but the same heavy quiet Thomas had felt each morning he came here, as if every noise, every whisper was being drawn into the walls themselves. He tried to speak, to call Brenner's name again, but his own voice sounded different in the space flat, hollow, swallowed. Before it reached the far corners of the room, Thomas backed away, his eyes lingering on the mirror for a moment. He thought he saw movement along the crack, a faint shimmer, as though something beneath the surface shifted just out of sight. But when he blinked, it was gone. The caretaker left the chapel that morning without touching the relic or the priest. He barred the doors behind him, nailing the warped wood shut. The scream still hung in his memory, not for its sound, but for what followed. Because it wasn't the scream that haunted him, it was the silence after. And as he walked back down Old King's Road, he swore he could still feel it following him. Not sound, not breath, only the weight of something that had heard the scream too, and decided to keep it. The chapel was locked by noon. Heavy boards were nailed across the warped doors, sealing the entrance against wind and weather. The windows, unbroken for centuries, were covered with black canvas, though no one dared touch the stained glass itself. Father Brenner was carried out on a stretcher. His eyes remained open the entire time. They moved only once, toward the mirror, still wrapped in its linen, as it was lifted from the altar and carried away by two investigators. He did not struggle. He did not speak. He hadn't spoken since the scream. Diocese ordered him transferred to a sanitarium outside Gloucester, a quiet place, away from the Yas, chapel and the road. He walked with assistance, his steps slow, his expression fixed in a calm that felt unnatural. When the doctors asked questions, he blinked, nodded, raised a hand when prompted, but his lips never parted, not once inside the chapel. The investigators moved carefully. They documented every surface, the cracked floorboards, the leaning pews, the strange dampness where the linen had been. Every note was clinical, precise, but none of them spoke more than they had to. The mirror was placed in a reinforced case. The linen remained wrapped tight, secured with cord, so no one would see its surface. It was transported to a temporary holding room, a converted vestry in a neighboring parish. The case was sealed, untouched that night. The first recording was made static at first. The low hum of the old tape machine, the creak of the vestry's wooden walls as they cooled in the evening air. Then, faintly, a sound not loud, not distinct at first. It seemed like a fluctuation in the tape itself, a tremor in the mechanism. But when the volume was raised, a pattern became clear. It was sobbing, soft, deliberate, rising and falling like breath. The sound did not echo in the room. It came from the microphone itself, as though it had been recorded at the source. Without passing through air, the investigators reviewed the tapes. All three heard the same thing: sobs, faint, rhythmic, childlike in tone, but without any age in their texture. They played it back against their live recordings, checking for interference. Something wasn't right. The sound persisted, even when the recorder was turned off, even when the machine was unplugged. The sobbing was no longer confined to the tape. It bled faintly into the room, as though carried by no source at all. They unwrapped the mirror, just enough to inspect the glass. The crack across its surface had not deepened, but the air inside the vestry felt heavier, cooler, the closer they stood to it. When one of them, A man named Delaney leaned close. He swore he could feel the faintest tremor in the frame, not a vibration, not movement, something subtler. A pulse. The sobbing grew louder as night deepened, not by much, just enough to be heard without straining. A steady, breath-like rhythm, coming not from behind the mirror, but from somewhere inside the reflection itself. Even with the glass covered, the sound did not fade. It followed the case, clinging to the air around it as if it had soaked into the room itself. Delaney suggested moving the mirror farther away from the parish grounds, but before the order could be given, the second tape was reviewed. In it, between the sobs, a word had formed, not in Latin, not in any language. The church recognized 3 syllables, slow and deliberate, repeated twice. The investigators played it back, again and again each time. The sound seemed a little clearer, a little closer, and by the third replay, all 3 swore they could hear another sound beneath the word, a faint exhale, slow, measured, as though something on the other side of the glass was drawing its first breath. None of them slept that night. The tapes were locked in a steel cabinet. The mirror remained sealed, wrapped and cased in the vestry. But by dawn, every man swore they could still hear the sobbing, not in the room, not from the mirror, inside their own ears. And each one, without meaning to, found himself mouthing those 3 syllables in silence. Though none of them could agree on what the word was, the paper is kept in a locked drawer, folded once, wrapped in a thin layer of archival cloth to keep the edges from crumbling. Its surface is darkened now, not from ink, but from the strange, scorched outlines that remain pressed into it. The handprints, 2 of them, splayed wide across the page, fingers spread, palms flat, not burned through, not deep enough to char the fibers, but enough to stain the paper with a dull, permanent, unnatural shadow, as though the heat had come from the inside out. It is the last page Father Brenner ever wrote. The note is brief, 4 sentences, each in his careful, deliberate hand. The letters are steady, almost too steady, as though written by someone moving through unbearable effort to keep control. There are no corrections, no hesitation marks, no ink blotches, only a clean, precise script, and the words read. It is not in the walls. It is in me now. The mirror is not a window. It is a mouth. Brenner's handwriting stops there. No signature, no date, no closing prayer, though his notes before this had always ended with one. But something wasn't right. The page feels different from the others. The archivists noted it the first time they handled it. The sheet is lighter, brittle, as though some part of its substance has been drawn out of it. The faint outline of the handprints is warmer to the touch. Even decades later, no test has explained why the caretakers at the diocesan archive refused to handle it directly. Now they use tongs, gloves, layers of gauze, but even through all that, some claim they can still feel the faintest tremor in their own fingers when they hold it, a rhythm, like a pulse, matching their own heartbeat. And that's when they hear it, not a sound from the paper, not in the room. Inside, a faint, breath-like hum, rising and falling in time with that imagined pulse. It lasts only a second, then fades, the investigators documented. The page is evidence, but none could explain how the handprints were made. There were no burns on Brenner's hands when he was taken from the chapel, no injury, no sign of contact with flame or heat. The paper bears no scent of smoke, no residue, only the marks as if the heat had not come from outside, but from him. Some believe the note was his final confession. Others think it was a warning, a statement made in clarity, not madness. Each person who has read it aloud says the same thing. The words feel wrong when spoken, as though the shape of them resists the mouth. The syllables sit heavy on the tongue. The throat feels dry by the final line. The mirror, I then was already locked away, sealed under layers of linen, cord, and lead-lined glass. But the sobbing on the recordings continued, and the sound would change each time Brenner's page was read in its presence. Sobs would grow quieter, then stop, replaced by something softer, almost imperceptible at first, a sound like a slow inhale, drawn not from the air, but from somewhere deep, as though the room itself was taking a breath. And when the investigators left the vestry each night, they swore they could feel it in their chests, a faint, pulling weight beneath the sternum, like something moving just behind the beat of their own hearts. Page remains in storage now. No further study is allowed without express permission. Its handprints are still warm, and anyone who holds it too long reports the same sensation: not a sound, not a voice, just a faint, cold pressure moving upward from the chest to the throat. And one archivist, the only one who dared hold it barehanded, said he heard something else when he put it down. Not aloud, not with his ears, inside a single word, unclear, uncertain, but repeated twice each time, louder, closer, until he realized it wasn't coming from the page at all. It was coming from his own breath. Mist gathers thick along Old King's Road. It sits low, curling through the trees, never lifting entirely on clear days. The chapel of St. Mirabel can be seen through the branches, its broken roof like ribs against the gray sky, its walls leaning inward as though pulled by some slow, unseen weight. The doors are chained now. Heavy iron links stretch across the warped wood, secured by two locks so rusted that no key has ever been used to open them. A sign, weathered to illegibility, hangs at an angle from one hinge. Only the red seal of the diocese remains visible. Building has not been entered in decades, not officially, not by anyone willing to speak about it. Yet those who pass near it say the chapel does not seem empty. Even from the road, even from the edge of the trees, it carries a feeling that lingers in the chest, the weight of being watched, not by someone inside, by the building itself. But something wasn't right. Maps still mark the chapel's location, but only vaguely on newer satellite images. The area appears blurred, as if the resolution fails only within its boundaries. No technical explanation has held. GPS devices will not lead drivers to it. They reroute a mile before the turnoff, circling endlessly through the surrounding roads, until the user stops trying. Yet people still find it. Hikers, campers, locals, who know the old paths. They come not to enter. No one touches the chains, but to listen, because the chapel makes a sound at first. It is faint, a dull, distant crack, like ice splitting on a winter pond, then another, and another, each one sharp, hollow, followed by silence long enough to make the next one feel louder. It echoes through the trees, but not outward. The sound pulls inward, as though the source is not a wall or a window, but something deeper, hidden in the center of the structure. And that's when they hear it, the repetition, not random, not scattered. The cracks fall in a pattern, deliberate, with pauses between them that grow shorter the longer one listens. Some describe it as a rhythm, like something counting. Others say it feels more like breathing, long inhales, each exhale punctuated by a sharp, brittle fracture. No one has ever seen the source. The windows are boarded from the inside, each pane covered long ago with planks nailed deep into the stone frames. There are gaps between the boards, but no one has ever dared to look through even. Those who approach the walls say their instincts keep them from peering inside, as if the cracks in the sound are not meant to be heard by eyes. The few who have stood closest, within a dozen steps of the chained doors, report something stranger, a faint pressure beneath their ribs, as though the air around the chapel pulls with each cracking sound. Not enough to hurt, not enough to stop them breathing, but enough to make each inhale feel unnatural, timed to something outside their own body. Some claim the sound is not the mirror itself, but its reflection. That what cracks is not glass, but something behind it, something that has not stopped watching since the day Brenner was found kneeling before a group of researchers tried to record the sound once. They set up equipment along the tree line, microphones pointed toward the chapel. On the tapes, the cracking is clear, consistent, but beneath it, they found something unexpected. Not a voice, not a word, just a faint, low hum, buried so deep in the audio, it required amplification to hear. The hum rises between each crack, then stops just before the next. The researchers described it as breath-like, but when the audio was slowed, The hum became distinct. It wasn't air. It was the sound of something wet moving behind glass. Team never returned. They released only one of the recordings, stripped of the final 30 seconds. When asked why, one technician said, "The last sounds were not cracks at all. Not glass, not wood, but something softer, like the creak of a throat struggling to form words. The chapel remains chained. It is avoided by locals, removed from all sanctioned walking maps, and absent from official GPS data. But the sound continues, always at night, always the same cracked pause. Cracked pause, each one louder the closer you stand, and those who have lingered too long swear that, just before leaving, they felt it, not in their ears, but somewhere deep in their chest, a faint, cold vibration, like their own breath, no longer entirely their own. No one checks inside now. No one tries to confirm if the mirror still stands on the altar. But every so often, through the trees, someone claims they see a glint of light, not candlelight, not sunlight, just a reflection as if the chapel is watching not outward, not at the road at itself, and the sound, even from a distance, is always the same crack, pause, cracked, and each time, a little closer. The vault is silent concrete walls, no windows, only a single steel door, locked from the outside, its hinges sealed in lead to keep the air still. The corridor leading to it runs for nearly 50 feet. Fluorescent lights hum faintly overhead, their glow never flickering, never dimming. By order of the diocese, even the shadows here feel still, as if afraid to move. Few ever walk this corridor. Fewer still enter the vault itself. Most of the priests assigned to the archive refuse to carry the keys. They say the air feels heavier the closer one walks toward that door, the kind of weight it presses into the ribs, tightening with each step inside. The temperature never changes, 7 degrees Celsius steady, a chill that numbs the fingertips after only a few minutes. The walls are bare. The floor is clean concrete, smooth and pale, as though it has never known. Dust the shelves hold relics, each tagged, each sealed, fragments of wood, iron nails, bones of saints and sinners alike. Most sit beneath glass domes, labeled in Latin, untouched by light or time. But in the center of the vault, isolated from the shelves, is a crate. A large, heavy box of dark wood, banded with iron wax seals, mark every edge, each stamped with the crimson emblem of the diocese. Across the top, carved deep into the wood, is a single word, speculum. Inside, wrapped in linen, bound with cord, lies the mirror, the same mirror Brenner faced, the one that cracked, but never shattered, has not been seen in decades, not directly, not by anyone who will admit to it. 2 archivists manage the vault. Their shifts are brief, 4 hours each, never longer. They sit in a small adjoining chamber, behind a reinforced glass partition, where monitors display the feed from the vault's cameras. Neither of them has ever opened the crate. Neither of them wants to. The rules are clear. Do not touch the seals. Do not enter the vault without written approval. Do not, under any circumstance, unwrap the linen. But something wasn't right. The cameras never stop recording. Each angle is fixed. One on the door, one on the shelves, one on the crate. The footage is reviewed weekly, and even with the mirror locked away, buried beneath cloth and wood, there is movement. Not much, not often, but enough to be noticed on some nights. The linen fogs. A pale bloom spreads across its surface, growing from the center outward, as though something inside exhales. The fog lingers, then fades. No heat source has ever been detected. No fluctuation in the vault's environment can explain it, and on certain nights, the fog sharpens, forms patterned chandrants, pressed faintly into the fabric. From within, 12 at a time. Always 12, they do not appear all at once. First 2, then 4, then 6, until 12 faint impressions emerge, overlapping, unevenly spaced, some small, some long and narrow. They remain visible for less than a minute before fading back into the cold linen. The archivists log the event each time. They do not speak while the footage plays. They do not look at each other. But last winter, something changed at 3:12 a.m. The pattern began as usual. The fog spread, the 12 prints formed, and then, after a long pause, a 13th appeared. It was different, larger. Fingers spread unnaturally far, the thumb set too low, as though the hand itself was shaped for something other than holding or touching. The other 12 prints seemed to shift faintly. Away from it, the fog grew thicker, almost heavy, like smoke trapped behind the cloth. The two archivists leaned closer to the monitor. They did not speak. One reached instinctively for the volume knob. Though the footage had no sound, that's when they heard it, not through the speakers, not on the recording. In the room with them, a faint rasp, slow and uneven, like breath pulled through a narrow throat. Both froze. The sound lasted only 3 seconds, then stopped. The 13th handprint lingered for nearly 2 minutes. Even after the fog receded, a faint shadow remained, a darker outline that seemed to stain the fabric itself when the crate was inspected the next morning. The mark was gone. No residue, no scent, no sign of disturbance. The footage was archived, access restricted. Only 3 people have viewed it since. 2 refused to describe what they saw. The third, a technician, tasked only with cleaning the camera lenses, left a note in the review log. Written in the margin beside the timestamp, it reads, "It isn't inside the mirror anymore. It's waiting for the next face." The vault grew colder after that night. Not dramatically, not enough to trigger the alarms that monitor the temperature. Just a single degree lower, 7 degrees, became 6. The archivists noticed it first in their breath. Not when they were in the vault. They rarely entered, but in the chamber outside, where the monitors flickered. Each exhale hung in the air a fraction longer than before, as if the chill had followed them through the glass. They did not report it. They wrote it off as nerves, as suggestion. But something wasn't right. The pattern returned the following week. Again at 3:12 a.m., the fog spread, blooming outward across the linen. The 12 prints emerged, slow and deliberate, and then the 13th appeared this time. The others shifted more noticeably, pulled slightly upward, as though recoiling from its presence. The 13th print did not move. It pressed deeper, darker, the fabric beneath it stiffening as though something wet had soaked through. Yet, when checked in the morning, the linen was dry, unmarked. The archivists began to keep their own notes, separate from the official log. Their handwriting grew smaller with each entry. On one page, beneath a string of dates, one of them had written only 2 words. "It listens." Soon after, the sound returned. Not the rasp, not at first. Something softer, a low, rhythmic hum, almost beneath hearing, rising and falling between the cracks of the vault's silence. The archivists could not trace its source. They unplugged the monitors. They stood still, holding their breath, listening. The hum did not stop. It seemed to come from the walls themselves, or perhaps from the air, as if the entire chamber had begun to breathe. And then they heard it again. The rasp, closer this time. Not long, not loud, just enough to make them both glance toward the sealed door, knowing neither wanted to speak first. The next night, one of the archivists refused to come to work. He filed for transfer, citing only health concerns. His replacement, a younger cleric, lasted 3 nights before requesting reassignment. Both avoided specifics when questioned. Both warned the remaining archivist to keep the lights on. It was during this rotation of staff that the 13th print began to linger longer. First, 3 minutes, then 5. Each time, the temperature dropped further. 6 degrees became 5, then 4. The sensors recorded nothing irregular, but the archivist's breath grew heavier, clouding the room outside the vault, as though the chill had seeped through the reinforced glass. Some began to suspect the crate itself was no longer sealed as tightly as before. They checked the wax markings, the iron cords, the nails along the edges. All remained intact, but still, the fog came. The handprints formed. The 13th pressed deeper, and that's when the footage changed. Not much, not enough to be obvious to anyone skimming through the weekly review, but those who watched closely noticed something in the static. Between frames, a faint shift in the angle of the other 12 prints, They no longer simply recoiled. They turned facing the 13th, as though whatever pressed them into the fabric was looking toward it, waiting for it, and on one recording, barely visible, the linen itself seemed to pulse, not outward, not like breath, but inward, as though something behind the cloth had drawn closer to the glass beneath. The remaining archivist, now working alone most nights, began to keep the monitors dimmed. He found the images easier to endure in low light, as though the fog and prints became less distinct when viewed through a shadowed screen. But in the quiet, with the lights low, he began to hear the hum more clearly. It was not mechanical. It rose and fell too irregularly. Each swell felt slightly out of rhythm, as if the air itself were struggling to keep pace with something moving behind the cloth. When amplified through his headphones, the hum carried a faint texture, wet, like liquid shifting across a smooth surface. Stopped wearing the headphones after that. The diocesan overseer was informed briefly of the ongoing anomalies. No investigation was launched. The official stance was simple. As long as the seals remain intact and the vault remains secure, the mirror poses no threat. But the archivist's own notes told a different story. He began writing longer entries, though his script grew erratic on one page. Dated March 14th, he described a dream, not of the mirror, not directly, but of his own reflection. He claimed that when he looked into a basin of water, he saw 12 faint shapes standing behind him, their forms indistinct, their hands resting on his shoulders, and behind them, a larger shadow. Its hand did not touch him. It hovered near his throat. He stopped sleeping after that, at least not deeply. His colleagues noted the change in his appearance. Sunken eyes, pallid skin, a tremor in his hands whenever the monitors flickered to static. He denied feeling unwell. He denied the dreams. But his notes told otherwise. The 13th print continued to appear. Its size never changed, but the spacing between it and the other 12 grew wider, as if the fog itself pushed them apart. Some nights, the 12 prints seemed to press together, their shapes blurring, as though they were huddling in the linen's faint light. The 13th remained separate, still patient on. The final tape reviewed before the archivist's resignation. The camera captured something new. The fog bloomed, the 12 prints formed. The 13th appeared, but before the fog receded, a faint shift occurred in the center of the largest mark. Not a sound, not a movement of the cloth, a glint, a reflection just. For a second, as though, behind the linen, a surface had turned, catching the light, even through the fabric and wood. It vanished as quickly as it came, but on the log sheet, the archivist wrote one final entry beside the timestamp. It can see through the wrapping now, only when no one moves, only when no one blinks. Some say Brenner never saw a demon at all, only himself. Others believe the mirror showed him something older than language. The vault remains locked, but every 13 days its alarm triggers.